Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to the shop. Today we are going to be making a burnisher. Now this is a very simple tool. It's just a hard piece of steel and that's about all it is. But in this case I found something with a carbide tool that is unfinished, and I'll be talking about that a little bit more later. And I'm actually going to be selling a kit with the blade and the ferrule that you can put on there. So if this is something you would like to have for yourself, I'll have a link to that down below. But today we're going to get into making this fun little tool. And yes, I really like this one. Now let's have a little bit of fun here. We're going to be starting with this block of katalox. It is an incredibly hard wood, 1.5 by 1.5 inches, and it's about 7 inches long. And so I'm just going to drill a bunch of holes through at different angles, trying to make them intersect so that at least one side will pour into all of the current open holes, taping it off and creating a bit of a dam so that epoxy doesn't flow in. And so I'm going to pour the epoxy into all of the pores and then put it down into the vacuum chamber, and this will make sure it gets sucked down into every crevice down inside. Let the exhaust off, and I do several cycles letting it pour in, bump out the bubbles, pour in, pump out the bubbles, and that gets it all the way down into the block. Then once it has been cured overnight, then we can pull it off and plane it down and get ourselves back to a regular block. And then go ahead and do it all over again. And I'm going to do this, I think I did it 4 times total, and each time with a slightly different color. I went with some fairly light tones, and I wish I had a couple more bold tones in there. But I kind of like the way it came out with the multiple colors. And so it's drill it, tape it, and vacuum it out, and then do it again. And this peach one is actually one of my favorites in the end. It actually came out pretty well. Sometimes there was a little bit of a leakage, and that made things a little bit more difficult. And sometimes I found it was just better to actually plane the tape off than it was to try and peel it off, because it got very aggressive to pull off. The tape I used on this one is the Tyvek tape, and that actually worked pretty well. I've also used wrestling mat tape, and I like that as well. Now we're going to start turning this. So I'm going to mark it off and find out where the center is, take it over to my new Barnes No. 5 lathe. Now this is a metalworking lathe, and I know I'm going to get a lot of comments of people hating the idea of turning wood on metalworking lathes. As long as you take care of it in between, and you clean it up and make sure your oil's not getting saturated and things like that, it's really not that much of a problem. Now the one problem I did have is I haven't made a tool rest for it, so I was experimenting with actually playing with the tools on it that I would be using for metal turning, and that actually works pretty well, other than the fact that I wanted some organic shapes in this. So I ended up roughing it down to a smooth cylinder with the lathe itself. And then I actually adjusted the place where the collet fits on. This was really nice because I could get some very precise turning and get things down to exactly what I wanted them. And I may end up using this in the future. It works fairly well. The only problem is it created a lot of chips and stuff that got down into the work, so I had to spend a good bit of time cleaning it up to make sure everything is in. On one end, I create a recess for the ring to fit on. You can see it's a bit loose here. I actually cut it down a little bit farther so that it actually gives me a really nice tight fit, and I had to pound it on in the end. Then I could use a tip on there to get into it. And it was somewhere right around here I was realizing, yeah, this just isn't going to work to create the natural shapes that I wanted. And so after getting it to a rough shape, I then used the tool itself to be a tool rest. So I turned it sideways and then allowed the tools to rest on that. But it was very useful for hogging off a lot of material and getting it roughed, and I kind of like that. So here you can see I use it as a rest, and I was a little bit afraid to work with my edged tools on this one, as I wanted to kind of experiment with things. And the nice thing about the carbide tools is you really can't mess them up. Well, you can mess them up, especially with the epoxy is running into a few issues. But I found that it worked out pretty well to do it with these. And this was kind of an experiment all around because I was playing with the lathe, and you have to actually pedal off to the side, and so you're working off to the side rather than being in line with it, which is a bit odd. But we can work it down. I'm going to create a little bit of a finial on the end here, and I was wanting to make it a little bit larger than what I ended up making it, but with the experimentation I ended up taking off a little more material, and then I realized, ooh, I got to do something with this. Once we get it all shaped down to what we want, then we can start sanding it. And so we can use this to sand it down pretty quickly. I'm going to start with 80 grit because it was a bit rough left over. And then I'll take it down to 100, 150, 200, 300, 400. And then we can burnish it with the shavings. And originally I was just going to burnish it with the shavings, but I started seeing the epoxy coming in. I was like, no, I actually got to take this a little bit brighter than what I can get with just the shavings. So I ended up going through a mesh to take it up to 8,000, and then I used some of the Yorkshire grit. I love this stuff because it breaks down as it turns, and you get this beautiful polish. So you can see deep into the epoxy. Really, really happy with how this came out. So yes, we're using the Yorkshire grit to polish it down. Now we can take it back over and start doing some of the work on it. I cut off the end on the lathe. Unfortunately, the cutoff came just before Luke turned on the video. So I'll blame Luke, but really I actually started turning it before he turned the camera on. Sorry, Luke. So here we can glue the finial on. You really don't need to glue it on because this is hammer pressed, but I thought, why not? I've got some 5-minute epoxy, so let's put some 5-minute epoxy on. And get it that far down, and then I needed to pound it down on, opened up a wrench so that I had the jaw to spread it, and there we go. We also need to drill the hole out for the burnisher to go in. And I ended up actually drilling this at a slight angle. I took the ring off because it wasn't registering quite as well with the twist bit, and I really should have kept that on there. You'll see some scenes where you can see it at a slight angle, and that's going to annoy me for a while, but oh well, such is life. Chamfer the edge. I do like leaving the wood a little bit proud of the collar. Just it looks aesthetically pleasing, and it protects the collar because it's just aluminum. So I like that look. Adding a little chamfer on there makes me happy. So we're going to put a little bit of epoxy down into the hole and then drive in the burnisher rod. Now that creates a really nice piston, so you push it down and it springs back. And so what you can do is actually clamp it in place while the 5-minute epoxy cures, but this means it's going to squeeze out. Oh well, we can wipe it off and keep it clean. And I like doing this because it fits in there really nicely, and you know it's seated all the way down in. Now we cut it off on the lathe, so that means we need to come back and file this down, and then we can sand it down to the same grits we were using. Some fine files, and then into some fine sandpaper, and then into the Yorkshire grit, and we can really polish this thing down and make it shiny. I like shiny. And I actually found a bit of a pad that I can put the sandpaper on it so it wraps around nicely, or you just put it in the palm of your hand. And then the Yorkshire grit needs friction, so you got to run it quite a bit on there until it gets down in there, and it gives you a really nice happy shine. You can see all the way down in the epoxy. Take it for a test drive, and if you've seen my video on how to actually sharpen with the card scraper that I just put out on Thursday, you'll see how happy I am. And this is poplar. I'm getting these curls with poplar. That is not an easy wood to scrape. Much like pine, you generally just get sawdust unless you get a really nice burr on there. Very, very happy with this burnisher. Gives me what I want. Curls. So there you have it, a little bit of epoxy, a little bit of fun, and I'm really, really enjoying this. Now, if you haven't seen the video that I did on Thursday about how to sharpen a card scraper and why I have this particular burnisher, this isn't just a carbide rod, this is an unfinished carbide rod, so it has a bit of a texture on here. And it is the easiest and fastest way I have found to sharpen a card scraper. It grabs the steel and pulls it out. So I have an entire video talking through that if you want to see that. Also, I'm now selling the kit where you can get the burnishing rod and the ferrule, so you can make your own. A fairly simple little kit, and there's a link to that down below. So if you want one of those, go and hop down there, and all the proceeds from that do help out the channel. So thank you for that. That really does mean a lot. So this was a bit of an experimentation and a little bit of fun. I kind of like how it came out. I think next time I'm going to play with it a bit more and maybe try some other colors and other things going into it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas on this. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Do you think it's just junky Swiss cheese? Or should I do something different next time? So thank you for that. So I do want to say a huge thank you to the patrons on Patreon. Everyone scrolling over here has been helping out the channel and are really the reason why this channel is still going today. So thank you for that. If you'd like to help out and keep this channel going, hop on to Patreon. There's a link to it down below. And I think that'll about do it for today. So until next time, have a wonderful day. The Swiss always make things better. First you have Swiss chocolate, then you have Swiss cheese, and now you have Swiss burnishers. Okay.
Cheese is better, but